My name's Caroline Miller. I'm the Chief Executive of Birmingham Royal Ballet. We're the biggest touring company based outside London. We have about 190 permanent staff, including dancers, an orchestra, costumes, technical, administration, and then we employ about 400 freelance creatives and technicians a year. And pre-pandemic, we performed about 175 shows a year, from Japan to Sunderland to Plymouth, to about 180,000 plus people a year. Culture for Birmingham Royal Ballet means two separate things. Very clearly, the culture is the art. That is what we do and what we make. We make ballet, whether it is traditional, big name ballets like Swan Lake or the Nutcracker, but we also create new ballets for tomorrow, bringing together designers, composers, choreographers with our dancers and our orchestra, the Royal Ballet Sinfonia. But then we have organizational culture. So we have a culture which is full of creative people, but many people who have worked at the organization for many years. Working at Birmingham Royal Ballet 10 years is relatively a short period, as some people have gone to the Royal Ballet School to train, joined the company at 18, and are now rehearsal directors at 70. So we have hyper specialist knowledge within the company. The best way to describe the culture of the organisation and the way that they like to talk about themselves is that we are a family. We're a family of people within the organisation, but also a family within the ecology of dance and ballet in the UK. So our sister companies are the Royal Ballet School and the Royal Ballet in London. And we all come from that founding in the 1930s. So the culture at Birmingham Royal Ballet is a little bit of conflicted within it, because you have a very high work ethic within the company. So dancers and musicians are those rare aliens that they are superhuman beings who have trained in one specialist subject every day. They will get up and practice for 8 to 10 hours a day, and then they will perform. And they may have been doing this since they were 3 years old. It's also a very collegiate team, because you can't put a show on unless you are in a team. But equally at the same time, it's very competitive, because if you decide to be an artist and you start in the corps de ballet, you are fighting to get yourself seen, to work yourself up to the pinnacle, which would be to be a principal dancer. And Birmingham Royal Ballet's newly appointed director, Carlos Acosta, is probably the most famous dancer in the world. So you're looking at having to work as a team, but also at the same time, having an element of competitiveness to drive yourself forward in your career. The other challenge with this culture is that dance is taught through the body. There is a notated system, which the Benesh notation, which you write down squiggles, which shows the choreography to the movement. But ultimately, if you are learning a new role, somebody who might be 65 will go into a room and teach you and tell you where to put your hand or how to turn your head. And that person's knowledge may well have been taught all the way back historically to the very first person who originated that role. So you've got a very traditional, hierarchical culture. A performing arts company is really good at managing risk. That is what we do. We take a lot of people, we take an unknown idea that starts from a creative spark, and we decide, with no idea of what the outcome is going to be, to put together a team and create a new work of art that may well cost us up to £1 million, that we then take out, put on a stage, and believe that we can sell this unknown quantity to a paying audience. So we've got this struggle between one way of a system of doing something and delivering results, and at the same time knowing that you have to do creative innovation and create new works and take a big risk financially as well at the same time. I think ballet companies of the scale of Birmingham Royal Ballet are all grappling with the same challenges right now. Is our art form still relevant for the 21st century? What product can we create that tells stories? How do we use technology? And how do we adapt the legal governance structure, which is about rights and copyright and creative IP, to adapt to a world that's moving on to digital and online as their primary performance sphere? Whereas before, the primary performance element you would make your art for is for live performance. And if you streamed it, that would be additional, and you would have to pay additional artistic or rights payments to everybody involved. So I think that all of the organizations are struggling, because it's a very international art form, on how we deal with changing how we run an organization. I do think that smaller, newer ballet companies or even contemporary dance companies, they are much quicker to adapt to the change. Pretty quickly with our industry, the whole narrative was about what we can't do. This is impossible. No one can do anything. And I'm relentlessly optimistic. That's how I've been described in quite a pejorative way before. And by about May, I couldn't stand it any longer. And I just said, look, this is what we do. We put on shows, we find solutions. We've got the best brains in the industry around this table. What can we do? Can we actually talk about what we can do, not what we can't do? And at that point, Carlos put a very interesting proposal on the table. He said, this is a great moment in our history, a devastating and tragic moment, but this is a huge moment in the history of the world, and there should be works of art that reflect what we went through. And so he said, let's commission a new ballet for COVID. And I was trained by a man called Michael Kaiser, who's called the Turnaround King for arts organizations. And he always says, everything starts from the art. That is our mission. And if you have a big idea, no matter how impossible it feels, people will come to you because they get excited by that big idea. We hadn't been very forward thinking on technology, but we did jump immediately on anything we could do. So we were the first company to broadcast a company class on Zoom with live piano, and it went out. The BBC quickly launched something called Culture in Quarantine, and we were one of the first things they did. None of us knew how to do it. Our company manager was on Zoom on his laptop, cutting between cameras with our dancers in Sydney and China, and because they'd all gone home when the pandemic happened. And then you had Carlos with really bad internet at his home in Somerset. And then we had to get clearance because the musicians union is really strong that the live pianist could play, but we did it. And at the time, everyone was like, oh my God, you can watch a company do something on this thing called Zoom. And now here we are 6 months later, it seems like nothing. But at that moment in March, it was a big deal. You can see how we've had to react to all these new ways, because our digital audience for the company from the period March to September 2019 was 1.4 million. And for the same period this year, it was 10.9 million. So now we're looking at how do we monetize that? And this new ballet that Carlos has commissioned called Lazuli Sky opens next week in Birmingham and then goes to Sadler's Wells. It's small numbers, 150 a show in Birmingham for 5 shows, 430 a show for 5 shows in London. But we were the first company to announce live shows. It was a double page spread in the Times. That turnaround public moment, look at them over there. We didn't know how the audience would react, but the shows sold out in less than 8 hours, and we had to put extra shows on, and they sold out again immediately. And now we're going to film that show and we're going to stream it pay-per-view. And that's been another huge piece of investigation about, as pandemic has gone on, whether it's the arts or anyone else, the platforms for how to film and monetize content pay-per-view, whether it's a comedy gig or a ballet like ours, everybody is trying and experimenting and developing. So we know that we're in the middle of it, and that this technology is continuing to change as we get better with it. But it's how do we spend the money we have now to get the results we want now, but recognize that we might have to switch technology providers for a long-term solution for the company. A lot of skills that we don't know how to do that we're having to find answers to because of this disruption. I started my career as in communications, as in marketing, and then as a publicist for a long time. And 10 years of my career, the first organization I ran was for the industry body, for the whole of the diverse dance sector. And my style of leadership is completely based on communications. It is the most important central point for me, starting point for me. So I've only really worked with cultural organizations. That's been my entire career, whether it's book publishing or rock music or ballet. And as I said, I was trained by Michael Kaiser. He has this program which he calls the Cycle, which is how to run a successful arts organization. And it all starts with the art and with the big idea. So my style is that I communicate quite strongly to everybody that my primary focus is the art. That's the thing that's most important. And I would rather tell everybody about how we are doing things as we go along and be transparent, even if ideas aren't firmed up or definite. But I feel that people need to come on that journey with you and need the excitement of the big idea. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You just say, we couldn't get the resources together, we couldn't make it happen, but we tried. Because I think if you wait too long to bring people into it, you leave too big a gulf of people making up their own narrative about what is happening. And I think in a moment of disruption like now, that's more important than ever, because everybody's scared. It doesn't matter whether you are working for Google or HSBC Bank or for Birmingham Royal Ballet. None of us know what the future holds for our jobs and our careers, or our towns or villages or cities that we live in. And all we can do, because none of us have the answers, is to keep telling people where we are on that journey and try and be as honest as we can that, you know, if we're trying to protect people, that we're doing our best to try and protect their jobs. And this is what we're trying to do for the future, while also pointing out to them, yes, these are the risks and the problems and the hurdles that we're having to try and find solutions for. We are now in a different world. I might be part of a historic art form that's done things the same way for 150 years, but this is a different world, and there's going to be different levels of resources for a long time, and we're part of the bigger society. People might think ballet is this rarefied little world, but we're just as aware of everybody who's losing their jobs or might lose their jobs in the future, or what's going to be left in terms of the economy and having to rebuild the whole of the nation's businesses. So we will have to change our business model. Ultimately, at the pre-pandemic, we already knew that our audiences were predominantly 50-year-old and plus. So we'd already made the decision that with Carlos as the new director, we would be putting a lot of focus on bringing the next generation of audiences through. We now know in the pandemic situation that our traditional audiences are going to be the people that remain at highest risk for at least the next 12 months and will most likely be the last people to return to the theatre. Now, they make the biggest donations to us, spend the most on tickets, the fastest for us. How do we keep them engaged as our audience during that period? And also, we are publicly funded. How do we serve them? We do not want a lost generation of older people in this country isolated and unhappy at home, because all the things they love to do, see their family, go to the theatre, go to museums, have been taken away from them. So how can we serve them? So I think there is a point that is about how do we serve them? And then there's the other point, which is how do we use digital technology and take this 10.9 million viewers and take them further, and recognize that there's probably a bigger international market for us than we realize. So 39% of those free online viewers have been for North America. We haven't toured to North America for about 10 years. So there's clearly an international audience for us there as well.